think of the Wii, I think of hidden gems. A system that's overrun with piles and piles of shovelware and games that force awkward motion controls on you without much thought given to the actual use of the technology. But underneath all of that, there are some of the greatest hidden gems of the last generation. In fact, over the years, I found there to be more curiosities, more creativity, and more games also that feel more like an arcade experience or a true classic games console rather than an entertainment center that also plays games on the Wii compared to the PS3 or the 360. It's true that it's harder to find the truly great games on the Wii than on those other systems, but when you do, the search is well worth your time for a very unique experience. When used improperly, motion controls are as horrible as their reputation. But there are the few examples of games that really utilize the potential of the technology to create a truly unique experience that is only on the Wii. Sometimes that unique fun experience goes unappreciated, and one example I feel is this hidden gem. Dragon Quest Swords is a very underrated experience, and after reading a lot of reviews from mainstream magazines, I find that the reason why it wasn't appreciated quite as much was expectations going in. Frequently I find reviews for this game really harp on the RPG elements, almost comparing it to true Dragon Quest RPG entries. You're not getting Dragon Quest VIII here, you're getting a unique spin-off. Comparing those RPG elements to true full-length RPGs and focusing on that element is not really the point of the game. In fact, those elements are what make the game truly fantastic. Instead, think of this as something like Time Crisis or The House of the Dead with the complexity and control of an RPG mixed in with the gameplay. What you get is a truly fantastic experience, a whole lot of fun, with a ton of replay, and a game that I absolutely fell in love with after just a couple hours of playing. While within the many dungeons of the game, it controls much like again, arcade-style shooter, House of the Dead, Time Crisis, Ghost Squad, Carnival, that type of thing. But instead of shooting with the Wiimote as if it were a gun, you swing the Wiimote as if it were a sword. There are various Wii motions for striking across, diagonal, jabbing. You can also access really cool special powers. You get companions that cast various spells. It feels like a true combination of a very simplified RPG with an arcade-style shooter. Like some of the best of the genre it tends to emulate, there are multiple pathways through each level. But as the RPG elements come into play, these are actually even more interesting than its arcade counterparts. As you gain new abilities or new items, you'll open up new pathways and be able to go through again and again to not only get better scores, but discover new areas, and this is sort of the game's way of having a grind as in a traditional RPG. And these levels are fantastic. Some of them are absolutely huge, and have so many different pathways and ways to go, you'll end up going through them 3, 4, 5 times and never really get bored because there's always something a little bit different to go through. One of my favorite early areas has you taking a bridge across a mountaintop or going through a rather exciting adventure down the rapids. Not only are the dungeons incredibly fun, and the controls simple yet intuitive and yet complex in that there are so many different ways you can handle each situation. There are advantages to tackling certain creatures before others, or situations where you have to hit back projectiles at your opponents and take them out that way. There's so many different elements to this gameplay that it keeps it fun even though it's repetitive in the same fashion that something like the House of the Dead would do. Not only are there many different attacks and different ways to utilize your companions and their spells, there's a shield to block incoming attacks, and finding different patterns of attack to take out different types of opponents. What elevates this beyond just a sword-slashing arcade shooter with the Dragon Quest name slapped on it are the RPG elements, which are something that really add a new layer to this game. By collecting different items, you can craft and upgrade your sword to different types and upgrade your armor. Your shield will wear out and have to be repaired as you use it in combat. The story, while simple, is much larger and more in-depth than typical games of this type, and are sort of a Dragon Quest light. Again, I say the best comparison to this game is not to RPGs, but to arcade shooters. And that way, instead of looking like a weak RPG with some cool arcade-style combat, it's more a really cool arcade-style game with an RPG-like story. And that gives you an entirely different experience when you're looking at it from that perspective, and perhaps you'll appreciate it more. Outside of the dungeons themselves, which have more of a free roaming feel than many other games of its type, something a little bit closer to the Dead Space Extraction game also on the Wii, you also have environments to explore in a more typical RPG fashion, such as the town and castle that you start off in, which is sort of the main hub one you'll return to save your game, to upgrade, to rest, continue much of the storyline, meet new people, and that part of the game really feels like a portion of a true RPG. Getting into it, even just this area by itself was so much larger than I thought it was going to be going into the game, far more interactive, more interesting, would change over time, and there were some fairly interesting characters. The entire game has a true Dragon Quest charm, from the soundtrack, which is right up there with your standard Dragon Quest game, the fantastic artwork, the interesting characters, although they're not quite as in-depth as, playing an 80 to 100 hour long full-fledged RPG, something that's more of a 10-hour experience with great replay value, is not going to quite get into the depth of character development, but they're interesting enough for what they are, and again, the story itself, while simple, is far better than in other games of its type. Dragon Quest Swords for the Nintendo Wii is an incredibly underrated game, and a game you should definitely go back to. It's one of those experiences that I feel will be appreciated down the road as a couple generations go by and people go back to the Wii to discover all those games they missed after they dismissed the Wii as just a shovelware system with Wii Waggle.